This weekend is December Community Day, and that means there's going to be a whole bunch of Pokemon that you can evolve in order to get some exclusive moves. In this video, I'm going to be going over each and every single one of these Pokemon and talking about the ones you should prioritize. Alright, so with that said, let's get right into it. Alright, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon GO video. Today we're going to be talking about this weekend's December Community Day. This event is going to start this Saturday from 2 o'clock p.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. local time, and it's going to continue on Sunday from 2 o'clock p.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. local time. During these event hours, there's going to be various spawns, and there's going to be a few of those spawns that you will actually want to catch. The way December Community Days work is that it is basically a recap of every single Community Day that happened over the year. So all of the Pokemon that were featured for each month's Community Day are going to make an appearance this weekend. There's going to be increased shiny rates as well as Pokemon getting some exclusive moves when you evolve them, and this is going to be imperative because this year's Community Days actually had some Pokemon that became meta relevant. So real quick, let's recap what each day is going to spawn. On Saturday, December 16th from 2 o'clock p.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. local time, you're going to see Slowpoke, Galarian Slowpoke, Togetic, Chespin, Fennekin, and Noibat in the wild. And on Sunday from 2 o'clock p.m. to 5 o'clock p.m. local time, you're going to see Poliwag, Wooper, Paldean Wooper, Timber, Axew, Froakie, and Grubbin in the wild. And then also you're going to see Charmander, Squirtle, Mareep, Swinub, and Larvitar. These were the Pokemon that were featured for Pokemon GO's Community Day Classics this year. Now in raid battles, we're going to see all of the Pokemon from the Community Days of last year, and some of those Pokemon are actually worth getting still. In 1-star raids, you're going to see Sandshrew, Alolan Sandshrew, Alolan Geodude, Hoppip, Teddiursa, Galarian Zigzagoon, Spheal, Starly, Roggenrola, Litwick, Dino, and Stuffle. So yeah, all of these Pokemon are going to be available for you to catch this weekend. But now let's talk about each of them and what they evolve into and what exclusive moves they get. I really do think that there's a couple of these that you will want to prioritize, and it's very important that you do because there may not be another opportunity to get these moves, and this may be your one chance to get some of the most powerful Pokemon for both the Go Battle League as well as with raid battles. Starting off, let's talk about Charizard. So, when you evolve Charmeleon into Charizard, you're actually going to get two exclusive moves. These include the Fast Attack Dragon Breath, as well as the Charge Attack Blast Burn. Now, it goes without question that every single fire type gets way stronger when it learns the move Blast Burn, but it's interesting that this Charizard also comes with Dragon Breath. That makes this Pokemon really good for both the Ultra League as well as the Great League. It's very much an offensive powerhouse, and considering that it could also learn some other attacks for some type coverage, this Pokemon is actually going to be really good. The one key thing is that Wing Attack is often considered the better fast attack, but Dragon Breath could still get you a lot of wins, especially against a lot of the most commonly used dragons. So I will say that Charizard is one of those Pokemon you should definitely prioritize. Next up, let's talk about Blastoise. So this Pokemon, like every other water starter that gets a Community Day, is going to have Hydro Cannon when you evolve into it. Unfortunately, Blastoise is one of the weaker water starters, so it's not necessarily something you should prioritize. Next up, let's talk about Sandslash and Alolan Sandslash. So both of these Pokemon got a Community Day move last year, and I have to say, their impact has still been felt to this day. Especially Alolan Sandslash, that Pokemon is an absolute menace in the Great League, and it's probably one of the best Ice-type Pokemon that you can have. That's the Pokemon between these two you should prioritize, especially because it may become meta once again in the future. Next, let's move on to Alolan Golem. So this Pokemon is going to get the move Rollout when you evolve into it during this event, and honestly, it's not necessarily any good. It might be useful in some specialty cups, but aside from that, I really cannot say that this Pokemon is worth it. So I would say don't prioritize Alolan Golem during this Community Day. Now let's talk about Poliwrath, because once this Pokemon received its Community Day move, it quickly shot up to becoming one of the best Pokemon to use in the Go Battle League, in both the Great League and Ultra League. This Pokemon will gain the Fast Attack counter when you evolve into it during this event, and that move is what makes this Pokemon gangbusters. Like, it's insanely good as a fighting type, and it does have a lot of type coverage with its Charge Attack Scald, so this is a Pokemon you will want to prioritize during this event, especially if you have one with PvP IVs. It's definitely one you will not want to miss out on. Alright, now let's talk about all of the evolutions for both Slowpoke and Galarian Slowpoke. Every single one of these Pokemon gains the charge attack Surf when you evolve into them. However, not all of them are going to benefit from it. I would say that out of all of the Slowpoke evolutions, Galarian Slowbro and regular Slowking are probably going to get the most benefits. That is because both of them are actually really good for certain specialty cups, and Surf is going to be one of those charge attacks that will give it a lot of type coverage. Regular Kanto Slowbro is also going to be really good with Surf as well. So if you have a couple of these with PvP IVs, I do suggest you evolve into them to get these moves, because eventually they're going to be relevant when it comes to a specialty cup. Alright, next let's move on to Ampharos, and this Pokemon of course gets the charge attack Dragon Pulse, and it's mainly going to be useful when you Mega Evolve it. Alright, next let's move on to Politoed, which is going to get the charge attack Ice Beam. This move is actually pretty good on this Pokemon. Unfortunately, Politoed hasn't been relevant for a very long time. It may become relevant in future specialty cups, but there's always going to be better options. However, I would say that Ice Beam is still going to be pretty good on this Pokemon, especially compared to the alternative, which is Blizzard. So yeah, this is a Pokemon that you could go after and kind of have it banked for future meta changes or specialty cups. Next up, let's move on to Jumpluff. I would say that this Pokemon is not necessarily that useful, so this is one you could probably skip out on. But Quagsire is definitely going to be one of those Pokemon that is going to gain a lot of power once you get its Community Day move, which is Aqua Tail. You very commonly see Quagsire with Aqua Tail in the Go Battle League right now, and that is because this Pokemon gained a lot of relevance because of this one move. So I would actually say that you should prioritize this one, mainly because of how useful it becomes once it receives Aqua Tail. Next up, let's talk about Tyranitar, which is of course going to get the Fast Attack Smackdown. This is going to be one of the best Rock-type Mega Evolutions, so I would actually say that you should prioritize Tyranitar. If you have yourself a high IV one, then you should definitely go for Smackdown because it's going to be a really powerful Rock-type raid attacker. However, a lot of players are using Tyranitar right now for its Dark-type attacks, so I don't necessarily think you should evolve all of your Tyranitars to get Smackdown. You will still want a couple in your collection that knows the move Bite. Alright, next up, let's move on to Walrein, which infamously was one of the most broken Pokemon in PvP when it received its Community Day moves, but unfortunately it received a lot of nerfs over time, so its significance dropped quite substantially. But some players would still consider it viable, so this could be a Pokemon, much like Politoed, you could invest into for future meta changes. Alright, next up, let's move on to Staraptor. This is one you can pretty much skip out on. It's going to get the Fast Attack Gust, but it's not going to make this Pokemon any significant. There's a lot of much better flying type raid attackers and PvP Pokemon out there, so Staraptor is unfortunately one that's going to fall by the wayside. But Togekiss is actually a Pokemon that might be worth going after, considering it does have some relevance in PvP. It's going to gain the Charge Attack Aura Sphere, which is going to give it a lot of type coverage, especially against rock types, so that is definitely one you should prioritize. Next up, let's move on to Mamoswine, which is going to get the Charge Attack Ancient Power. Again, there's a lot of better options for moves with Mamoswine, so I would say that this is one you don't necessarily need to prioritize. Mamoswine is going to be one of the most useful Pokemon in Pokemon GO, but not with Ancient Power. Next up, let's talk about Gigalith. So this is a Pokemon that gains the Charge Attack Meteor Beam. I would say that this is another Pokemon you should not prioritize. It's definitely not that good in just about any circumstance, so I would say this is one you can skip. But next, let's move on to Conkeldurr, which is going to get the Charge Attack Brutal Swing. This is basically a move that's going to give Conkeldurr a lot of type coverage. Unfortunately, you don't necessarily use Conkeldurr in any scenario outside of maybe raid battles, so this is a Pokemon you don't necessarily have to care about, but it may be good to have in the back burner, considering that Conkeldurr is still a pretty decent fighting type raid attacker. Next, let's move on to Chandelure, which is going to get the Charge Attack Poltergeist. This Pokemon is actually really good. As both a fire type raid attacker as well as a ghost type, it's going to be really strong. So this is one you could actually prioritize because Poltergeist is going to be a phenomenal charge attack for this Pokemon. Next up, let's move on to Hexorus, which is going to get the move Breaking Swipe. Unfortunately, Breaking Swipe recently got nerfed in PvP, so this Pokemon's relevance drops significantly. So I would actually say this is one you don't necessarily need to prioritize, but considering it is an iconic Pokemon, it wouldn't be a bad idea to still go for this Pokemon. And now let's move on to Hydreigon, which is the fully evolved form of Dino. This Pokemon is phenomenally good, especially when it comes to Dark type raid DPS. You will definitely want to prioritize this Pokemon because Brutal Swing is going to make this Pokemon one of the best in your collection and probably one of your most used Pokemon as well. Alright, now let's move on to Chestnut, which is going to get the move Frenzy Plant, and that is of course because it is a grass type starter. When it comes to PvP, Chestnut is actually pretty decent, and Frenzy Plant is what's going to make it really good. So this is a Pokemon you could potentially prioritize, but I would still say that it's not going to be worth it compared to the other Pokemon on this list. Next up, we got Delphox, which is of course going to get the move Blast Burn. This Pokemon is unfortunately not that good. It's not going to see any play in PvP, and when it comes to raid battles, there's going to be much better options. This is a Pokemon you could skip out on during this weekend. But of course, the same can't be said for Greninja, which is going to be one of the best Pokemon to use when it comes to PvP, especially with its Charge Attack Hydro Cannon. It actually has access to a fast attack now called Water Shuriken, and it generates an insane amount of energy. So this Pokemon is going to be an absolute powerhouse when it comes to PvP battles. It's definitely one you should consider this weekend because it is going to be really good. Next up, let's talk about Noivern, which unfortunately is not going to be that relevant, and the charge attack that it gets is not going to make it any better, which is of course Boom Burst. The same can also be said for Vikavolt, which I have seen a lot of players make the argument that it can be good for PvP, but it's actually not Vikavolt that's really good, it's actually Charjabug, which is the Pokemon that evolves into it. So this is a Pokemon you do not necessarily need to prioritize, but maybe you could go for the PvP IVs of Charjabug. And then next we got Beware. I don't ever think this Pokemon was relevant ever when it comes to PvP or PvE, so this is a Pokemon you can skip out on. However, Obstagoon is actually pretty decent. This is a Pokemon that might be worth going after, especially because of how good it can be in both the Ultra League as well as the Great League. Now, Ursaluna is actually a pretty good Pokemon for the Master League. It might be worth going after, but I would say it's not going to be high priority unless you have a 100% IV, and in most cases, there's going to be better ground types anyway. And then finally, there is Clodsire. This Pokemon is actually pretty decent, and it can make your teams in the Go Battle League a lot more well-rounded. It's definitely going to be a good Pokemon to use, but unfortunately, the charge attack that it gains, Megahorn, is not necessarily that good for PvP. So I would say that it's not going to be high priority. I would just focus on trying to get PvP IVs for this Pokemon rather than going for its Community Day move. Alright, so there you have it. These are every single one of the exclusive moves that you can get during this weekend, and I would say that there's a couple of them that you should definitely prioritize. However, there's also a bunch of them that you could totally skip out on, and you're going to be completely okay. But I would love to know your thoughts regarding everything that I talked about down below. Is there a particular Pokemon that you're going to be prioritizing this weekend? Is there another Pokemon that you feel deserves to be higher priority? Definitely share all those thoughts down below, and let's have a great discussion. And yeah, with that said, here comes the end of the video spiel. So thank you so much for making it to this point in the video. If you ended up enjoying it and found it to be informative, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe as well so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos just like this one. And don't forget that little bell as well. And I want to give a quick shout out to all my patrons on Patreon. You all make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, make sure you go and check out the links in the description below. For all my patrons, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list. So if you want to interact with me in some way within Pokemon Go, like with remote raids or the friendship system, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. Also, if you want to support my channel without spending any money, then make sure you go and follow me on social media. My handle is @Jinsula, and I'm on these following platforms. Alright, and that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, good luck this weekend, and I'll catch you all later.